The moment a simple website page shift turned into a royal earthquake that may have just rewired the entire future of the monarchy is here. And what King Charles III has quietly set in motion has left Prince Harry shocked, Meghan Markle on edge, and every royal watcher asking one question that won't go away: who is really controlling the final narrative inside the palace?
I think you can summarize this trip in 2 words: desperation and failure. Desperation and failure. Yikes and double yikes. Desperation and failure, my goodness.
Charles is not the pushover that the press seems to think he is and that they're trying to present him as being. He has not been taking his son's calls for some time now.
William is known to hold a grudge, and more than that, he cannot forgive his brother for what Harry has put his family through.
Harry was always, shall we say, the one that was difficult, always wanting to mess around, an attention seeker, many might say.
Meghan is someone who's desperate for fame, she's desperate for recognition, she's desperate for money, of course, and status. Now, isn't that?
I believe we are looking at a deeply corrupt establishment institution working with Harry and the palace to rehabilitate Harry's image and bring him back.
Well, failure because there is no money. The end. There is no money. Harry and Meghan are making no money.
Diana's philanthropic legacy is not there to act as a PR angle for Prince Harry.
We're seeing them effectively crawl on bended knee back to Britain, and they are to be pathetically grateful if the king agrees. Just let that sink in for a moment.
For years, this one silent question kept circulating like a shadow nobody could shake off. Why were they still appearing there? Why did the institution act as if nothing had changed after everything that had been said, written, and broadcast to the world? And now, suddenly, the silence has cracked. Because what has just happened inside the palace corridors is being described not as an update, but as a calculated message. A line drawn in silence so loud it echoes across continents. And at the center of it all, King Charles III, a man now walking a delicate line between monarchy and legacy, is being pulled into a storm that insiders say has shifted from patience to quiet finality.
The Queen was very firm, if you remember, chums, about you're either in or you're out. There's no half in, there's no benefits, this is the deal.
Every accusation, every interview, every documentary frame built a growing wall between the Sussex narrative and the royal institution. Allegations that shook public trust, a book that pulled back private curtains, televised revelations that traveled across every time zone, and yet the most controversial detail of all remained untouched for years: the official royal website still listing Prince Harry and Meghan Markle as if history had not already moved on. That detail, small on the surface, became symbolic fuel for critics who argued that the monarchy was either frozen in loyalty or silently conflicted behind closed doors. And as voices grew louder, so did the speculation that something had to eventually break. It is one big club, insiders whisper, a structure where perception is power and silence is strategy. And now the question is no longer why it stayed, but why it changed when it did.
His brother crossed a line in both his 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey and his autobiography Spare, in which he shared, among other things, intimate details about his and Meghan's relationship with Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales.
The timing of what happened next is what turned a quiet adjustment into a global talking point. Because according to insiders, this was not random. It was precise. It aligned too closely with upcoming movements, planned visits, and shifting internal dynamics between senior royals. And what makes it more intense is the suggestion that Prince William and King Charles III were not divided in this moment, but aligned.
Is one big club, insiders. I have long said the establishment are still protecting Prince Harry. At this point, I would argue, did he ever really leave?
And that alignment, if true, changes everything people thought they understood about the royal power structure. Because this wasn't just about a page online, it was about symbolism, legitimacy, and the invisible thread that connects public identity with institutional approval.
He is not allowing Harry to make hay while the sun shines and take advantage. And if he sees Harry, and if he sees the children, it's my understanding is it's going to be in very limited, constricted terms.
The Sussex presence on the official royal platform had become more than information. It had become interpretation. To supporters, it represented continuity. To critics, contradiction, because that page suggested even after departure, that connection remained formally intact. And in the world of monarchy, perception is currency. It decides influence. It decides relevance. It decides who still feels inside even after stepping out.
The difficulty now is, and this is the bit of fighting between William and His Majesty the King, is will they crumble? Let me explain.
And this is where the narrative sharpens further, because Meghan Markle's entire post-royal positioning has often been viewed through the lens of branding versus belonging. Without the royal association, critics argue, the structure changes completely. The prestige shifts, the reception changes, the doorways open differently or stop opening at all. And that is why even the smallest alteration in how that connection is displayed publicly becomes magnified into something far larger than a web update.
To start to understand that you have to have respect for this institution and you can't exploit it. I mean, you're not a whore in a convent setting yourself up as the chief madam. You know, this is a convent and it's supposed to be pure.
Because timing is never just timing in this story. It becomes interpretation, and interpretation becomes fuel, especially when it lands just before planned travel, just before narrative rebuilding, just before a carefully managed public return strategy begins to unfold again. And suddenly, what looked like digital housekeeping starts to look like positioning.
Flour sprinkles. Flour sprinkles, my husband. And the spread, the disgusting, horrible, runny spread. If you opened it, right, it's been sitting in a warehouse for so long. I've got no doubt that there is just mold in there.
And that is where the speculation intensifies, because whispers inside royal commentary circles suggest this moment was not accidental and not isolated. Instead, it may be part of a broader internal shift where decision-making between King Charles III and Prince William is increasingly synchronized rather than separated. What emerges from this picture is not chaos, but alignment. A father and son, long rumored to be divided in their approach toward Prince Harry, now reportedly moving in parallel. Not reacting emotionally, but structurally. Not individually, but collectively. And if that interpretation holds weight, then the removal or alteration of symbolic presence on official platforms is not just administrative. It is directional. And as this unfolds, the emotional tension builds around one core idea. If communication is cut, if visibility is reduced, if institutional acknowledgement is redefined, then what remains is not just distance, but transformation of relationship itself. And as this second wave of revelations unfolds, the narrative takes a far more personal turn, because behind every institutional move, there is now a human consequence that cannot be ignored, especially when it involves a father, a son, and grandchildren caught in the middle of a global spotlight that never turns off. What began as a discussion about a website page has now evolved into something far heavier, something that insiders describe as emotional finality wrapped in administrative silence. Because the real question is no longer what changed online, but what changed between them behind closed doors. The Sussex listing, once seen as harmless or even respectful continuity, has become the symbol of a much deeper fracture. To some observers, it represented lingering acknowledgement. To others, it represented unresolved tension dressed as diplomacy. And now, with its quiet alteration, speculation has surged that the monarchy is no longer interested in maintaining symbolic ambiguity. Instead, it is moving toward clarity, even if that clarity feels cold, even if it feels irreversible. And that is where the emotional temperature spikes again, because according to commentary from royal insiders, King Charles III is not operating from sentiment alone anymore. He is operating from structure, responsibility, and the burden of institutional survival. And Prince William, long portrayed as the stricter voice in the background, is increasingly seen as part of a unified stance rather than a separate force of resistance. The idea of division between father and son is fading, replaced by something far more coordinated, far more deliberate, and far less forgiving than many expected. But while strategy unfolds inside palace walls, the outside world continues to focus on the meaning behind titles, branding, and legitimacy. Because in the modern era, royal identity is no longer just ceremonial. It is commercial, global, and deeply tied to perception economics. And that is why Meghan Markle's positioning remains central to every discussion. Without former royal reinforcement, critics argue, the entire structure of post-royal influence changes shape. And with each institutional adjustment, that structure becomes more fragile, more questioned, and more exposed to public reinterpretation. The timing of all this, especially with upcoming travel plans and renewed media attention, has only intensified suspicion that this is not reactive, but strategic. Because in royal history, timing is never neutral. It communicates intent without words. And when intent is communicated without words, interpretation fills the silence with its own narrative, often louder than any official statement could ever be. And now, whispers of internal alignment between King Charles III and Prince William are no longer dismissed as speculation. They are being discussed as a working reality, a shared understanding, a shared boundary, and possibly a shared conclusion about how to handle ongoing tensions with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle moving forward. Not through confrontation, but through controlled distance. Not through public argument, but through institutional quietness that speaks louder than any headline. And that is where the emotional weight of this entire situation becomes impossible to ignore, because beneath every strategic decision lies a family structure under extreme strain. A father who was unwell, a son who has publicly spoken his truth, a brother who has drawn lines, and grandchildren growing up separated from one side of their heritage. These are not abstract pieces of narrative. These are real fractures inside a family that once stood unified on global stages. And yet, according to observers, what makes this moment historically significant is not just the distance, but the permanence of the tone now being set. Communication channels are reportedly minimal. Meetings are tightly controlled. And even when contact is attempted, outcomes appear limited or redirected through formal structures rather than personal exchange. This is where the story becomes heavier than gossip, because it stops being about what was said publicly and starts becoming about what is no longer being said privately. Silence becomes policy, absence becomes message, and distance becomes the new language of resolution. And still, the most unsettling part is what comes next, because if this trajectory continues, the royal family is entering a phase where reconciliation is no longer the default expectation. It becomes conditional, procedural, and possibly rare. And that shift alone changes how the public will interpret every future interaction, every visit, every photograph, and every carefully chosen word. Nothing here is fully concluded. Nothing is fully closed. But everything is undeniably changing shape. And in that shifting shape, the monarchy is not just managing image anymore. It is managing separation, legacy, and control of narrative in real time.